Brandon Shell is set to retire, and what records could the Buffalo Bills break in 2023? We're breaking that down today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. If you are watching on YouTube, you can see that I am not at home. I am in a mountain house here in Western North Carolina. Had an opportunity to come and spend the week here with my family. It's a beautiful home, a beautiful view. And so we are remote this week, or at least for the rest of the week. I recorded a couple of episodes earlier this week from home, but now we're on the road. And so that's why things look a little bit different. But what's not different is that we're going to talk Buffalo Bills football here for you on this podcast. And we received some big news today about Buffalo Bills offensive tackle Brandon Shell retiring. And so that's going to be our lead story. We're going to talk about that first. And then I want to discuss some of the records that the Buffalo Bills could potentially break in 2023, some franchise records. And I always love to spend time looking through the record books and seeing things that stand out. And so I want to share a lot of that with you here as part of our discussion today. But let's start with Brandon Shell. And we received some good news as it relates to player participation from practice on Tuesday. Tommy Doyle and DJ Dale practiced, and both of those guys were injured during the preseason win over the Colts. And so it's good to see them back in action. We also saw Reggie Gilliam return to practice. Now, the non-participants were Damian Harris, Terrell Bernard, Eli Ankou, Cam Lewis, and Brandon Shell. And Brandon Shell didn't practice because reports are that he intends to retire from the NFL. And so let's talk about this and the consequences that it has for the Buffalo Bills. Well, first of all, Brandon Shell was the number 2 right tackle behind Spencer Brown. And that's been my expectation, that Spencer Brown's backup is Brandon Shell. And I was thinking that he was going to make the roster and be the primary backup to Spencer Brown. Well, he's retiring, and so he's not going to be the primary backup to Spencer Brown. And it's a loss for sure. I mean, you loved having a guy with the experience that Brandon Shell has had. I mean, he's been a primary starting right tackle in the NFL for like the last 7 years. And it was nice to know that you had that veteran experience behind Spencer Brown, especially because we know Spencer Brown, it's a big year for him. He's been very uneven through 2 seasons. And it's time for him to realize his ceiling. And it was nice to know that, hey, if it doesn't come together, you got Brandon Shell. Well, now you don't have Brandon Shell. So what do you have? You've got some options here. And I know that the natural lean or the natural inclination for a lot of people is to think, okay, well, what players can the Bills bring in? Could they trade for a right tackle? Could they sign a right tackle? I'm not expecting a big move, to be completely honest with you. I think the Bills will look at their internal options that they already have and feel like they have enough tackle depth. And I'm thinking that between the options that they currently have in Ryan Van Demark, who we've talked quite a bit about on the last several episodes of this podcast, David Quessenberry, who was on the team last year, can play both right and left tackle. I know that he's been a very inconsistent player, but a guy with time on task and experience. Tommy Doyle, a young toolsy player that is obviously coming off of injury that I think the team likes a good bit. And Richard Gouraige, that between those options that you can piece together this tackle depth. Now, obviously, it takes a hit. There's no question about it. Brandon Shell was the guy that could really help stabilize things, particularly on the right side. But you're not without options. You have a veteran in Quessenberry. You have very toolsy young developmental players in Demark and Doyle that are quite honestly very intriguing to me, especially Demark. Like I said, I've spent a lot of time talking about him for a reason here on the last few episodes. And then, of course, Richard Gouraige, who I'm not expecting much from, but he's at least a name that you feel like on the practice squad can be an option. Not to mention Ryan Bates, who I think the Bills at one point thought could play some right tackle for them as well. So not expecting a major move here. And I think between those four guys that are already on the roster, two of them make it, probably Demark and Quessenberry. I'm not fully ready to rule out Tommy Doyle. I'm anxious to see what he looks like over the next couple of preseason games. But I think between those guys, the Bills will have their backup offensive tackles to Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown. Now, as for the salary cap implications here, it was a very good deal for the Bills. Only $152,000 signing bonus that they're on the hook for. There's no guaranteed money on his contract, so it's not like the Bills are going to rack up a bunch of dead cap space from Brandon Shell's retirement. All right, folks. Well, that was obviously the lead story, but the main thing that I wanted to do before that news came through was talk about the records that the Buffalo Bills could break in 2023. And I guess I'm just a football nerd. I love looking at media guides. I love looking at all-time records, both single season and career, single game records. And so I wanted to bring some of those big ones to your attention today that we could be mindful of for the Bills in 2023. And I spent this morning really diving into the Bills media guide. And so I wrote down a bunch of things here that I think could happen. And I don't know if you guys are like me, but growing up playing Madden, I love to do Madden. I love to do franchise mode. And whenever I did franchise mode, it was absolutely about winning and trying to win Super Bowls and all that. But I tried to break records, right? I wanted to have a quarterback that broke all the records, the receivers, running backs, all the stuff. And so I guess this is just a little bit of me taking myself back, 20, 25 years ago into that mindset, but applying it to real football. I haven't played Madden in, 10 years at least. And I don't plan on playing Madden. I know that I had said in the podcast that with Josh Allen being on the cover, it's made me at least think about getting a game system and buying Madden, but I just can't do it. I can't put myself in that position where I incorporate that into my routine of things I do regularly. I'd rather read. I'd like to spend more time stretching. I can't incorporate that into my routine. So I'm not going to start playing Madden because Josh Allen's on the cover, but that same spirit that I have about breaking records is still within me. And so I want to get into some of that with you here on the podcast. So after a quick word from Nutrafol, I am going to discuss what records the Bills could break in 2023. But first, did you know that 80% of men will experience hair thinning in their lifetime? It's normal, but it doesn't have to be your fate. You can get ahead of thinning with Nutrafol. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve your hair growth, visible thickness, and visible scalp coverage. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting root causes of thinning, such as stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism through whole body health. So take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. And for a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men. That's spelled Nutrafol.com/men and enter promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's Nutrafol.com/men, promo code LOCKEDONNFL. All right, folks, let's talk about some records. We'll start with some passing records. Josh Allen. So here's the deal with Josh Allen. Josh Allen is currently 1,603 passing yards away from 20,000 for his career. And that's a nice milestone. And surely he's going to break that probably within the first few weeks of the season. He will be a guy with 20,000 passing yards for his career. He's also 12 passing touchdowns away from 150 for his career. So a couple of milestones we should see pretty early in the season for Josh Allen to top. Probably within the first half of the season, he will top both of those numbers. Now, within the context of the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen is 43 away from tying Joe Ferguson for the second most passing touchdowns in franchise history. And so that's possible, right? That'd be a healthy amount of touchdown passes for Josh Allen in 2023. But if he does get 43, he will this year tie Joe Ferguson for the second most passing touchdowns in franchise history. And my fun fact with Joe Ferguson is that no quarterback in team history has started more games than Joe Ferguson at quarterback. He has more than Jim Kelly. And so Josh to be able to do that with nowhere near as many games started is pretty cool. Now, as for becoming the Bills' all-time leading passer in terms of touchdowns, I mean, that's going to happen eventually, but he's still probably 3 to 4 seasons away from breaking Jim Kelly's numbers there. But I think just initially here with Josh Allen, 1,603 yards away from 20K for his career, 12 passing touchdowns away from 150 for his career, and he's in striking distance to become number 2 in passing touchdowns in franchise history. Now, as for some single season records, the Bills' single season passing record for yards is 4,544 by Josh Allen. He owns that record, and of course did that back in 2022 and did it in 16 games. And so I think this is definitely a record that is within reach for Josh Allen in 2023, breaking his own single season franchise record for passing yards. And if he averages 267 passing yards per game in 2023, he will break that record. And so I think that's surely within the realm of possibilities for Josh Allen in 2023. Now, as for single season passing touchdowns, Josh Allen, of course, owns that record, and he owns the top 3 passing touchdown seasons in the history of the Buffalo Bills: 37 in 2020, 36 in 2021, and 35 in 2022. And so, again, given the passing touchdowns record happened in a season where there was only 16 games played, I think that really does help Josh Allen and his quest to get 38 or more, which would break his own record. Now, one of the things that gives me some encouragement with Josh Allen and breaking records this year is the reality of the schedule. The Buffalo Bills schedule is pretty challenging. They play a lot of good quarterbacks, and I think the Bills will probably have to be a competitive team well into games. They're not going to be able to kind of take off the fourth quarter in certain situations like maybe they did in the past. And so I think kind of having to keep your foot on the gas for longer, playing better teams, playing better quarterbacks, that's going to lead to more output necessary from Josh Allen. And I could really see him, really piling on some statistics, because in the past there's plenty of games where the Bills had games well within hand and they didn't really have to keep their foot on the gas. And so I think you could see that lead to an uptick in statistical production from Josh Allen. And part of what I'm going to do very soon, and I know I said this a couple of times, but it will happen very soon, is I'm going to give you all of my 2023 Buffalo Bills stat projections. And just to kind of let you know where my mind's at, I'm thinking a lot about that dynamic. Well, could we see more volume and more output simply due to the fact that the Bills are playing better teams with better quarterbacks this year, which is different than what has happened in previous seasons? And so that is definitely something that is going to influence the way that I project some of the statistics for the Bills in 2023. Now, some other passing milestones for Josh Allen. Passing yards, the Bills' single game passing yards record is 463 by Drew Bledsoe against the Vikings back in 2002. And that's certainly possible for Josh Allen. I don't know that I'm going to sit here and predict that will happen. I do think that passing touchdowns and passing yards are probably likely going to happen. Does that even make sense? But I feel better about that than Josh Allen passing for 464 yards and breaking Bledsoe's record from back in 2002. Also, passing touchdowns. Josh hasn't really touched this one yet. Single game passing touchdowns. The record is 6 by Jim Kelly in 1991. And then Joe Ferguson had 5 twice, and Jim Kelly had 5 twice. And so will we see a 5-touchdown regular season game from Josh Allen in 2023? I think that's something to keep an eye on. Josh is rewriting the record books for the Bills in terms of passing production, but the single game regular season passing touchdowns is one that he's not quite touched yet. So if Josh is really looking to, further rewrite those record books this year, I think single game passing yards and single game passing touchdowns are 2 areas where things could be pretty interesting. All right, let's talk about rushing records here. Bills, and these are going to be tough, right? Because the Bills aren't necessarily a team that runs the ball a ton, and they're not a team that commits to running the football with a single player a ton. So I don't really feel like many of these are going to happen, but it's at least worth acknowledging so that we can at least have these numbers filed away as we watch the Bills this year. So the Bills rushing single season rushing record, O.J. Simpson, 1973, 2,003 yards. Folks, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's going to be a record that's probably safe forever. I mean, do you think the Bills are ever going to have a 2,000-yard rusher? Not anytime soon. So that's going to be a nope. Rushing touchdowns for a single season, O.J. Simpson also owns that record. In 1975, he had 16. I don't see that happening for a Bills running back. I don't think a Bills running back gets to double-digit rushing touchdowns, much less 16 to tie the record from O.J. back in 1975. Rushing yards in a single game, O.J. Simpson owns that record, 1976, with 273 yards. I don't think so. I think you would have to have not only a couple of big explosive runs, but there'd have to be enough volume there as well to rack up the yardage necessary to get to 273. So I think that one's safe as well for OJ. And then rushing touchdowns in a single game. This one is not a record held by O.J. Simpson. Cookie Gilchrist owns this record. Back in 1963, he had 5 rushing touchdowns in a single game, and I'm not going to predict that a Bills player gets that. Fun story, I guess, really random sidebar on Cookie Gilchrist. We have my family, we got a dog maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and it's our 3rd dog. We like dogs. And his name is Bruno. And for whatever reason, my daughter, who's 3.5, started calling him Cookie. And I don't know why. There's no explanation for it. She started calling him Cookie, and so she calls him Cookie quite a bit, which inspired me to tell her about the looky, here comes Cookie. And now she says that all the time. So Cookie Gilchrist back in the 60s with the Bills. I know that's a long time ago, but his legacy lives on in our household because we have a dog that my daughter calls Cookie. And whenever, I wouldn't say every time, but I would say regularly, she says, looky, here comes Cookie. All right, so there you go. There's your random sidebar for the day. All right, in just a moment, we're going to talk about receiving records, defensive records, and some rookie receiving single season records that maybe Dalton Kincaid could challenge in 2023, coming up after a very, very quick break. All right, folks, let's look at these receiving numbers. And Stefon Diggs has put a dent in some things here when it comes to the Bills' all-time receiving numbers. First of all, within franchise history, Stefon Diggs is 40 catches away from passing Lee Evans to be number 4 all-time in receptions for the Buffalo Bills. And so that should happen. He should be at number 4 within the first little stretch of the season there. He's also 449 receiving yards away from passing Frank Lewis for number 5 all-time in team history. And he's 1,105 yards away from passing Albert DeBunyan for number 4 in franchise history for receiving yards. So I think that's probably where he'll get to. Now, if he has a huge season, 1,745 yards, that'll allow him to pass Lee Evans for number 3. But I think that's probably not in the cards. And then, of course, you got a ways to go to get to Eric Moulds and Andre Reed. Diggs does have a good amount of receiving touchdowns, 29 receiving touchdowns already with the Buffalo Bills. Bob Chandler is number 5 at 34, so he's in striking distance there. Albert DeBunyan is number 4 at 35, and then Lee Evans is number 3 at 43. Eric Mold's number 2 at 48. So I think that he should be at number 4 by the end of the season. Again, Diggs with 29. He's number 6. Bob Chandler is number 5 at 34. DeBunyan number 4 at 35. So I think that's where he'll get is to number 4 all time by the end of the season. He's only 6 away from tying, 7 from breaking that. All right, now let's look at some receiving yards single season. The single season record for receiving yards for the Buffalo Bills is held by Stefon Diggs. Did it back in 2020 with 1,535. And then number 2 is also Stefon Diggs with 1,429. And so can he break 1,535? I think so. If he averages 91 yards per game in 2023, he will break his own record from 2020. And I think Diggs is super motivated this year. I'm expecting a lot of production from Allen to Diggs. This could be their most productive year yet. And so I don't think it's crazy to think Diggs could break his own record for receiving yards in a single season. Now, as for receptions in a single season, Stefon Diggs has the top 3. Number 1 with 127, number 2 with 108, number 3 with 103. And so he can break his own mark from 2020 if he averages 7.5 receptions per game. That's totally possible for him. And so he'll have the top 4 reception seasons in franchise history. Now, this next one is something I've talked about for a while. It's the receiving touchdown record for a single season, which is a pretty low number. It's 11 for the Bills. Bill Brooks did it in 1995, and Stefon Diggs did it in 2022, last year. Is this year the year that somebody gets 12? I think so. I think Diggs gets 12 this year and breaks that record. And it's a low number. Most teams have a single season receiving touchdown record much higher, but the Bills is pretty low. I think this is finally the year that that gets broken. As for single game records, the single game receiving yard record, you guys probably remember this one, 265 yards from Lee Evans back in 2006 against the Houston Texans. He had like a couple of were they like 90 yards or 80-yard touchdowns in that game? It was insane. Some big bombs from J.P. Losman. But, you know, I don't know. That's a lot of yards. 265, I think that takes one of those really special games like we saw there. I mean, Gabe had some big-time production against the Steelers last year. You need some of those types of plays and then even more to get to 265. As for single-game receptions, Andre Reed has that, 15 of them in 1994 against the Packers. That's a healthy amount. I don't know if Diggs will get that. He'll have some 10 reception games, but I don't know about 15. And then single-game receiving touchdowns regular season. We know Gabe Davis did 4 in the playoffs. Jerry Butler had 4 in 1979 against the Jets, and Don Beebe, 1991 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So single game receiving touchdown record, not Diggs, not Lee Evans, not Eric Moulds, not Andre Reed, not James Lofton, Jerry Butler in 1979, and Don Beebe in 1991. Let's look at some defensive records. The one that stands out to me in terms of a career number is interceptions. Jordan Poyer is 10th all time for the Buffalo Bills with 22 career interceptions. If he has 5 this year, he will then move into 4th all time and pass a bunch of players. He'll pass Steve Freeman, Booker Edgerson, Nate Clements, Mario Clark, and Nate Odoms if he gets 5 this year, and that'll give him 27 for his career with the Buffalo Bills. Now, Charles Romes is number 4 with 28. Mark Kelso is 3rd with 30. And then you have Tony Green with 37 and Butch Bird, number 1 all time for the Bills in interceptions with 40. You know, what's interesting about interception totals, and I'll go ahead and give you this one. Actually, interception, the single season interception record for the Buffalo Bills is 10. Billy Atkins did that in 1961. Tom Janik did it in 1967. What's so interesting to me about interception totals is how back in like the 60s and 70s, the interceptions were just tons of them, tons of interceptions. And they didn't throw the ball nearly as much as they do now. And what's interesting about that is players now don't they don't have the volume of interceptions that you saw these guys back in the 60s and 70s. I know rule changes played into that quite a bit, right? It's become a lot easier to throw the football. I mean, drastically different than back in the 60s, but you just don't see those gaudy interception totals in present day football like you did back in the 60s and 70s. As for single season sack record, that's 19. Bruce Smith did that in 1990. I don't know that we see a Bills player touch that. I mean, if Von Miller was healthy, maybe, but I think Bruce Smith is probably going to be pretty comfortable with that 19 sacks in a single season record for a while. Now, lastly, I just want to mention some rookie receiving single season numbers because Dalton Kincaid, a big potential this year to be a high volume piece of this offense. The rookie receiving single season records for the Bills: receptions 65 by Sammy Watkins in 2014. I think that's possible. I don't know that I'd predict it, but I think he'll be somewhere near that. Receiving yards is 982, also by Sammy Watkins in 2014. And then receiving touchdowns is 9 by Lee Evans in 2004. So maybe on some of those, receptions feels like it's the most likely, but I'm not sure I would confidently say any one of those records will be broken this year. All right, folks, this has been fun, a little bit different than our normal programming. We get a lot of meaty conversations in here all the time. Sometimes I just like to take a look at some different perspective and look at some different angles that we can discuss this football team through. And so I hope that you enjoyed this. I always enjoy kind of putting this together and diving into these records and being mindful of what could be achieved in the coming season. So that's what we did here today on the podcast. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you'll take a second to make sure that you are subscribed. Would love it if you also took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.